Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Acacia Hills Geisha, wash-processed Tanzania from Coffee County. There's the cup right there. And Coffee County, originally based out of Fukuoka, Japan. I'm currently outside of their Setagaya City location here in Tokyo, Japan. And yes, it is still raining. I just happened to find a recording spot where it is sheltered, and this is honestly one of my favorite recording spots up to this point, as it's much more peaceful and quiet than the vast majority of the parks that we've been in up to this point. But yes, Coffee County, this is my first time trying any of their coffees, and they're a coffee roaster that's come highly recommended from so many people. Let's discuss the notes on this one real quick, as they are pretty similar to a lot of the other coffee shops that we've been to, in the sense that they have all of their current offerings available as a pour-over option. So when I saw this coffee, it immediately caught my attention because we've actually reviewed the same coffee from Leaves earlier in the series, and as of this moment, that's my favorite coffee that we've reviewed in this entire series. So when I saw this coffee roaster carrying it, I immediately wanted to try it and compare and contrast it alongside of the Leaves version of it. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing this one. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. The other thing I wanted to say about this coffee is the roast profile for this one is interesting because it's also still a very light coffee. I would say it's on par with the Leaves one. If there's anything different though, this one seems to focus a little bit more on the acidity, the brightness. So if anything, it feels like it's just been developed in a more acidic, bright, focused manner. And that's kind of the best way I can describe it. But these coffees are still definitely on the significantly lighter side of things. And this one of the lighter coffees that we've had in this entire series. So that's to say that they seem to roast on the much more light, modern side of things, especially relative to a lot of these other Japanese-based coffee roasters. Now, I did ask the barista what the roasting machine they use is, and to my surprise, well, I guess maybe not my surprise, they also use a Probat, which has been so interesting. Again, a continuous theme throughout the entirety of this series is that all of these well-renowned coffee roasters seem to use the Probat as their primary roasting machine. So found that to be interesting once again. But let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. I'm pulling up my notes here real quick for this one. Oh, I guess I didn't write down any notes. But yes, I remember this one quite well nonetheless. So this one right here, it did offer so many similar traits and characteristics to the other Acacia Hills Geisha, which is to say that it was a very clean coffee. And what I noticed right at the forefront was that this coffee focused so much more on that brightness. And that's what I'd already mentioned. If anything, right off brew, I couldn't help but shake the feeling that it was maybe a little bit too tame and moderate because it just seemed to really have a heightened citric acidic component to it right at the start. However, as you do let this coffee cool down, which typically can be the case with geishas in general, it really opened it up in such a beautiful and vibrant, lovely manner, as there were so many attributes that could be felt in this one. Most specifically, there was a really nice floral component to it, and with the other Acacia Hills, it seemed to have a candied florality, which this one also has. In addition to that, I've already mentioned the citrus. That was a more candied lemon aspect present within this one as well. They do have a blood orange note listed on here, which I could see. There's a slightly bitter and sweet citric component in this coffee as well. But the thing I really noticed and I really want to focus on is the wonderful stone fruit aspect of this one, as I could not help but feel a very ripe, fresh fruit finish within this coffee, especially upon the cool down. And that really endeared itself to me, as I couldn't help but feel it was one of the most enjoyable experiences I'd had from any of these coffees at this point, especially given the extremely clean and well-defined profile within this coffee. In addition to that, there are some bright tart berry aspects, which is kind of interesting. Fun fact about this coffee is that they do list a black currant note on here. So it did have a slight bit of like a Kenyan-like brightness characteristic to it, but that's not necessarily what really seemed to stand out with this coffee for me. The acidity, yes, but once again, that fresh fruit aspect that was present within the finish, easily my favorite part of this coffee, one of my favorite parts of this entire trip. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right. And we have one level 5, and that is the cleanliness. So yes, that has been a consistent theme with these Acacia Hill coffees, as these are the only two ones that have scored that level 5 for me. Great clarity, immense clarity. And even though there's some things that might contrast it, including the brightness, there is still just so much definition within this coffee that it justifies that level 5 mark, typically reserved for geishas, and this one earned that mark. Then we have a bunch of level 4s, and we will start with the finish level 4. Yes, and this one right here, it does have a slightly more subtle finish. It does have a slightly bitter citric finish to it. Again, that little more bright tart aspect that's present within this finish. But even then, it's also balanced out well by a very sweet and fresh fruit aspect also present within this coffee. So really enjoyed those parts. Very, very nice finish to this one. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, and when I first made this tasting wheel, I'm like, are we going to have a surprise level 3? Because this coffee, right after it had been brewed, was not necessarily the sweetest. But once it does cool down, you really seem to feel so many of those candied effects within this coffee, and that is definitely justified at that level 4. If anything, maybe I could say that the Leaves one was slightly sweeter and this one was a little bit more bright as the acidity reaches level 4 here. One thing they did note on the card that they gave me was that this one has a lively acidity, and I can definitely see that, as this one just seems to have more brightness than that Leaves version of this coffee. So those are the two things that are the big difference, and a lot of people will know that I have a preference towards sweetness versus acidity, so that necessarily wasn't my favorite part of that coffee or this coffee, but we continue on through this tasting wheel as the florality also reached that level 4 mark. And yes, that's been consistent among both these coffees, as this one also had a wonderful candied floral aspect to it. Once again, reminiscent of that honeysuckle, but in addition to that, some also white soft flower aspects present within this one. Really enjoyed that part of it. And then here's going to be a really interesting part, the fruit notes, as the berry fruit reached that level 4. Yes, it weirdly has a kind of Kenyan brightness to it, which I definitely wasn't expecting going into this review, but it was definitely one of the more notable and interesting things about this coffee. Very different from the experience with the Leaves version. Citrus, level 4. Yes, and it's the first thing I noticed within this one, and had this coffee not changed so dramatically and so drastically, then that's probably what we would have focused this review on. But once this coffee does cool down, you get so much more depth and variety within the coffee itself. Stone fruit, level 4. Yes, and I couldn't help but smile when I reached this stone fruit component because it was so lovely and one of my just really enjoyable parts about any of these coffees. And I'm still gushing about it mostly because it was so sweet and enjoyable and well defined that, yeah, I was just really impressed by that. They do have a nectarine note on here. Yes, I can definitely see that. I'm going to use them slightly interchangeably because if it's a little bit more of that fresh fruit, stone fruit, then I like to use those two. But nonetheless, very nice stone fruit present within this one in a very clean and well-defined manner. Caramel level 3. Yes, that's the candied aspect of this coffee. And while it may not have necessarily been as candied, I toyed around with the idea of keeping it at a 2. I do have to say that there's just enough sweetness and enough candied components within this one that it did justify that mark. Savoriness, level 3. Yes, there's a little bit more of both the... That actually makes a lot of sense. I didn't even think about that. The savoriness is from that slightly tart berry kind of Kenyan-like feel that's present within this coffee. In addition to that, there's a savory tea component, but when I'm really kind of sitting back and thinking about it, looking at this tasting wheel, I'm like, that actually makes a lot of sense why I scored the savoriness as high as I did. And then last thing worth discussing is the body at a level 1. Lighter bodied cup of coffee, again, fully expected given what this coffee is, but as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. So this one is either my favorite or my second favorite, right up there with the other Acacia Hills Geisha that we have reviewed in this series. I really like this coffee. Maybe I could go back and buy a bag of it. It's kind of tricky because I've already purchased so many bags of coffee, but this one right here probably is my favorite of any of the ones that we've reviewed. So maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to review this the second time, a full bag review. But this one is a standout. The other one was a standout, and these coffees are just really, really nice. They're my profile sort of coffees. They reach on all of the marks. They have sweetness, clarity, great clarity as well. Fruit components and floral aspects as well, all of which in significant abundance. But I think maybe the reason I like this one a little better is for two reasons. One, it's a little bit more unique. This coffee just had that unique kind of Kenyan-like feel to it, which the other one didn't have. The other one I would say is maybe a little bit more straightforward, my type of coffee, with an emphasis on those candied floral components. This one I feel like I enjoyed a little bit more because it offered the uniqueness as well as that wonderful peachy aspect to it. So it just gave it a little bit more, I want to say, depth. Although they're both really nice and complex coffees in general, they are some wonderfully done geishas. So massive credit to Coffee County. I think they did an exceptional job, and I completely understand why this is one of the more reputable coffee roasters in the area from the people I've talked with. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I'm going to focus on, again, my type of coffee drinker, so somebody that prioritizes those big four: clarity most specifically, sweetness, florality, and fruit components. This one had all four in notable abundance. Most distinct things about it, of course, the citric and the stone fruit qualities, those are definitely present, as well as a unique Kenyan-like feel to it. So kind of combine all those factors together in a more lighter profiled coffee and with some wonderful delicacy. And you get something like this, the best direction I can point somebody towards and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, any of the Acacia Hills coffees, or anything from Coffee County, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it wear them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Acacia Hills Geisha, wash processed Tanzania from Coffee County. Thank you for watching.